We see if they show up.
I'd like to call the Finance Committee City Council meeting to order, please. Again, this is another one of our meetings where we have the Finance Committee here and we have full participation from the full council. So hopefully everyone will be a participant this evening. First item on our agenda is public comment. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to the EDC budget. Mr. Rehnquist.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson, members of the council, press, and guests. The EDC, by its joint powers agreement between the city and the county, is required each year to make a budget presentation to the city and the county, and not just for your review, but to ask for approval. So that brings me here today. You have in your handouts a copy of the EDC budget, and this is a experienced group in looking at governmental budgets, and plus our budget has not changed very much for right at 5 years now. I'll start with the revenue portion, Councilmember Anderson. This is an appropriate venue, I take it. Okay, I'll start with the revenue portion. The first change you'll notice in county tax levy, $465,000. Our levy has been $455,000 for 4 years continuous. We have a slight increase, and I'll cover that in just a minute. Most of the other figures are a reflection. Of course, I've always said that a budget is a historical document carried forward. And most of the other figures in the revenue section are a result of our experience factor. Total revenue is $543,981, and you'll notice a significant number, three lines up, $64,774 from the EDC's reserve fund. The EDC has just shy of $500,000 of expendable reserves that it has been designated to funds, but one of the funds that we have available is for our reserve fund budget dedication. I will now go into the expenses. Please stop me as there's questions, or we'll wait till the end and answer any and all questions. You'll see the EDC's, most of the figures are pretty self-explanatory. I'll go all the way to the bottom of that first page. You'll see total countywide business development of $36,000. And if you look up from there, from two line items, you'll see Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad Tiger II grant. The EDC's contribution for the Tiger II grant was going to be $35,000. You have heard that we have not received the Tiger II grant, and on the 23rd, the EDC's joint powers will meet, and it is their intention, as it is appropriate, to reduce the levy, and as you know, as governmental officials, you cannot increase it. I believe the levy will be reduced back to the $455,000 that it has been for the previous 4 years. And you're saying, you're probably saying to yourself, well, the grant was $35,000 and the levy increase was only $10,000. We'd found $25,000 in the budget. The EDC budget, had it not been for that $35,000, we'll show you at the end, would have actually had a slight decrease this year. Now, another slight change is miscellaneous countywide business development. We moved it up from $5,000 to $10,000. With the addition of Connie Schmall and with her activities as being liaison to all of the cities in the county, we have found that we've been doing more in terms of helping out with business retention grants and items of that nature around the county. I'll take us to page 2 if there isn't a question. Most of the rest of the committees are pretty well self-explanatory. Again, they're, as a rule, not huge dollars, so I won't get into going through $200 and $350 line items. They're reasonably self-explanatory for folks. You'll notice as we go down, the marketing committee, one of our active committees, is $33,000. Right up from that area is the technology advisory committee. That's $4,000. The EDC has had these $500 website development mini grants available for 6 years now. They've been quite popular, and that only funds 8 of them at a full $500. But that seems to be enough for most of the companies in the county have taken advantage of this that would intend to. You'll also notice tourism and leisure travel. That's $34,000. That money is a pass-through and put right in the hands of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. The EDC is given 1 seat on their board. We are entirely satisfied with the efforts of the Convention and Visitors Bureau and thought there was some redundancy in our work. And so that's where those dollars are designated. Total committee expenses of $88,100. I'll take us to the top of page 3. People are always interested in salaries, aren't they? We know that. The executive director, myself, you get my salary has not changed for several years. I will just, and that's been, I have not asked for an increase for several years. So I felt we have just now come out of a recession. It did not seem to be appropriate in times of the worst recession the country may have ever had to be asking for increases, and I can't complain about my pay. We'll leave it at that. The assistant director's salary, I've recommended a 5% increase, and also for the business development specialist, that's the assistant director, as you know, is Gene Spalding. The business development specialist is Connie Schmall, and their compensation is reasonably self-explanatory. We get into our administrative expenses. We've got a total of $36,457 in the different administrative expenses. We do keep our people educated and concurrent in their programs. So you'll notice we do spend some money in seminars and sending our people to schools. I'll take us to the back side of the second page, or the fourth total page, depending on how you're looking at it. These are our office expenses. As we're going down in rent, we've had a decrease in the EDC's predicted rent for 2015. The new office location will be lower rent than what it's costing us right now. And you get an idea of the other areas that we have for our budget. Just $2,000 allocated annually for furniture and equipment and our copier expense going on down through telephone and telecommunications. A total budget of $543,981. We were at $512,000 a year ago. And we would actually, take the $35,000 away, there'd be a slight decrease. I went through it quite fast, but I'll answer questions as appropriate.
Okay, thank you for that. It was a good explanation. I just want to explain and remind the committee and the council that the Joint Powers Board, made up of 3 council members and 3 county commissioners, did approve this budget at our July meeting, with the understanding that if we didn't get the Tiger II grant, that we would take the levy back to the $455,000, which is where it had been before. So Mr. Rehnquist is correct. I believe that when we meet next week, we will be advocating reducing the levy by $10,000. So that said, questions? Councilmember Nelson.
Just a question on the Tiger II grant. It seems to me when I read it that they talked about maybe there were some other possibilities for that Burlington Northern. I'm just curious if you would comment on that and if there's any need for resources to be expended to try to do something else?
Mr. Chairperson, Councilmember Nelson, you're absolutely right. There is the possibility, in fact, there's a rather strong possibility that an alternative proposal will come forward. And at that point, I think it's quite possible that the three local participants, the EDC being the most minor, the city and the county, along with MnDOT, will be asked to renew the pledges that were made. But that's an entirely separate, there's decisions that have to be made at pay grades much higher than my own. Will we go back for the next round of Tiger II grants because there is more opportunities? Were we to do that, we have a very unique and strong coalition that's been put together. How could we possibly keep that together for another 6 months or year? There are some opportunities that we have. There are some landowners that have been told that we're going to be wanting to buy your land. We can't. Is it appropriate that we allow them to sit for any great length of time? So I think the position the EDC will take is all effort to go forward with the project that we had. That was an $18 million grant. There's no way we're going to make up $18 million in revenues, so that means there has to be some cuts, and will they be palatable to all the variety of parties? I think it'll be an interesting discussion. Just let me leave it at that. But that being the case, I expect to be coming back to this body, back to the county and back to my EDC boards and asking them to renew their pledge. But that'll be a renewal, not the existing pledges are considered to be off the table.
Okay. I have one more question, sorry. Since your budget was done back in July, I understand you just went through a retreat within the last month, and I heard very positive things about it. So is there anything that happened at your retreat that will your budget allow you to do the goals that you set forward in your retreat?
Councilmember, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Anderson, Councilmember Nelson, I look at budgets in an entirely different way. I look at being told the amount of money that we have to work with, and then finding ways to make it work within that realm. And of course, it's easy to say that when you've got a 4-page budget like the EDC has versus the cities or the county's budget. But we have sufficient monies to accomplish the task, and what it amounts to is reorientating our staff and our efforts to work within the budget that we have, and I'm very comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? If not, we do need a motion to approve this budget, if that's the will of the group.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
Is this full council vote or just?
This is a full council vote. Everything until we get to it's a good question, until we get kind of the finance agenda a little further down is a full council. So, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Thank you, Mr. Rehnquist.
Thank you.
All right. We will now, assuming I get to it, go into our 2015 proposed budget. And most of this information is going to come from Administrator Stevens and Finance Director Okens. So I will turn it over to you to lead us through this portion, please.
Sure. I think I'll let Steve Okens start, the Finance Director. He's got some responses to some previous questions that were asked, and then we'll run through the capital program kind of in 3 phases: facilities and projects, vehicles, and then we'll talk about pavement management. And the vehicles and pavement management piece, the Public Works Director will be helping with that as well.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, there is a handout in front of you, and for those in the audience, there are handouts, extra copies over on the table on the side of the meeting room. One of the questions that was asked at our last meeting was the examples of the county levy and the school district's levy. What we had provided at that meeting was the city portion only. And so what you have before you tonight is copies, excerpts from their budgets and their websites, which includes the total levies for Candioi County, It also shows you a net levy, which would be minus their local government aids, and then following that, information from the school district on their levies for the past 3 years. Again, these are taken right from Candiway County's website as well as Independent School District 347's website. One of the examples or questions asked at last week's meeting or 2 weeks ago was on the EDC that we have just discussed on their levy being steady or at the same level, and that was a true statement. The reason that the city portion of their levy showed as a decrease was because of the increase in egg land prices on their values. So there was somewhat of a shift from their levy from the city of Willmar proper over to the county. So we would pay a smaller portion of their levy. So the fluctuation in valuations in egg lands do have an effect in that instance. Levy limits, we are compiling at this time levy limit information from the League of Minnesota Cities. That does have an impact on levies as well, on the ability to increase your levy or not increase your levy. As most of us are aware, starting in 2008 when the state did a lot of unallotment, the unallotment, the levy limits include local government aid and city property tax levy. When the state did an unallotment, they actually cut their LJ allotment after the ability to increase the levy or to make that up. And so that's where the city incurred a bunch of setbacks on our capital programs, which we'll be discussing further on in the meeting here. And the city used those reductions in capital programs as kind of a balancing effect for the city budget, simply for the fact that we did not have the ability to do anything with the levy because they had cut it after levies were set. Even in the years coming forward, the reduction or unallotment which happened had an effect on when and if the city could do anything with their property tax levy. If the state unallotted, it was after the ability to set the levy. If they cut LGA, the levy limits allowed the cities to increase them, and that's what the city did. Some of the discussion that we've had on new construction, since 2009, the new construction has been able to generate about $40,000 to $65,000 in additional levy without an effect on the rate. If you recall, for 2015, we're calculating about $60,000 of that. But we hope to bring additional information on the levy limits and the effects and the new construction at a later meeting. But again, these are excerpts right from their budgets, and these are total dollars.
Just a question. Does the county not, are they not subject to levy limits? Because theirs seem to always go up unless it was because of valuations. Do you know?
I am not aware of their levy limit abilities. I certainly can research
No,
that.
it's not, probably not that, it's not that important. I thought maybe, because they've pretty consistently gone up. Some of them very small, and I thought maybe that was because of the valuation, like what we had. But that's not that important.
We can include that in our research and our report on levy limits in the history of those.
Okay. Questions on this topic? Okay.
The other item, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that I had written down where there were some questions on the fund balances section that was included in your packet last time. We did not include those again, but we do have explanations. The first one I had noted was that Councilman Ahmed had questioned the $200,000 that was labeled as blacktop or street pavement management. When researching that, we found with the vacancy in the position in the past 3 years that dollar amount just got missed and did not get included in the funding availability for the pavement management system. That will be included in the 2015. That was the intent when the $200,000 was set aside to include that. The council in the last couple of years have designated an amount to be used for the street program. It's been about $147,000 a year. But this amount, just with the vacancy in the position in the last couple of years, and Public Works Director Christensen just coming on board this year, that did not get cleaned up, and so we would propose that that will be available when we look at any kind of financing for the 2015 proposed pavement management system that the council decides on. The other area that I had written down that there were questions on were the uncompensated absences. There was some mistitling on the sheet that was handed out. There are basically 3 areas of uncompensated absences. The first area is for current employees, and these are based on contractual obligations that the city has. Employees are entitled to earn at different rates vacation and sick leave. The different rates are based on the contract that the individual falls under, as well as the longevity of the employee. And the amount and the accumulation, again, differs depending on the contract. Most of them allow accumulation twice what they annually earn. And so the city has what the total of the liability for the city for current employees' vacation and sick leave balances. Now, when an employee retires, that will lead me into the second 2 parts of the uncompensated absences. That reserve or that dollar amount, or if they use their vacation or sick leave, is reduced and pays for any accumulation if they happen to have some that they haven't used when they leave employment. The second part of the uncompensated absence is for the early retirement program that the city offers. The early retirement program is basically in its 4th period of time. The city started this a number of years ago when they offered an early retirement program and had window periods for employees of opportunity. In 2008, I believe it was, the city administrator at the time proposed to the council, and the council open-ended the early retirement program. The intent of that was to try to maintain long-term employees. Presently, the city has an employment of 100 to 105 full-time employees. About 40% of those qualify for the city's early retirement program. The criteria that is used is that the employees get 1 year of credit for every 3 years that they've worked for the city of Willmar. The credit that they get that the city puts towards their health insurance is $430 a month. The criteria is that the employee has to have worked for the city of Willmar for over 20 years and that they qualify and do indeed retire under the PRA rules and regulations. The PRA has changed their rules and regulations primarily for employees that have started employment since June of 1989. June of '89, employees no longer qualify with the combination of age and years of service for the rule of 90. The rule of 90 is if an employee age and years of service equal 90, they could get full retirement. Now employees have to reach their full retirement age without taking a reduced penalty on their retirement, and that penalty is somewhat substantial. I won't get into that this evening. So the likelihood of employees retiring before they reach the age of 65 or full retirement, and maybe up to 66 and a half, the penalties somewhat discourage that. But we can get into more discussion on that. So, but for every year that employees are kept with the city is 1 year that they are closer to 65. And so it's about $200,000 a year that becomes available and is factored into the upcoming budget cycle for those that are at the retirement age or would qualify for retirement and would qualify for the criteria that the council has set up. The third part of the uncompensated absences are for retired employees. Let me just go back a second. The second part also includes the liability that the city has for employees who have retired. In 2014, we had about 6 or 7 employees retired, and so they qualify for that retirement, and that is also included in that number as well. we appropriate the annual allotment into the budgeting cycle. Moving on to the third part, that is for retired employees who have, they have the option to leave a portion of their sick leave with the city to pay for health insurance. That has changed in a couple contracts now to where that is sent to the Minnesota State Retirement System and for a healthcare savings account. And/or vacation, the employees have the ability to spread their severance pay over a 3-year period that was intended by the council for tax benefits to the employee. But those are the three parts of the uncompensated absences. The full liability is covered, and those are fluctuating. The numbers that were given to the committee at the last meeting was a snapshot as of the end of 2013, and so we are constantly changing those based on contracts, based on and retirements, based on the time of the year and those types of things. So even though the reserve showed those in there, and that's one thing that I might want to mention is that the fund balance that was presented to the committee is not the investment portfolio. Sometimes they are mixed, and sometimes they're talked about, the investment portfolio and the fund balance as one and the same, and they're not. Basically, our investment portfolio or our cash balances have to be reduced by basically the liabilities for the city to arrive at the fund balance. And so there's not $55 million in fund balances available. A number of the fund balances that we discussed at our last meeting, again, are restricted. And the budget process, the available funds are always given to the mayor at the time as available to be appropriated. Those are the questions that I had.
Councilmember Nelson?
Just to clarify, the way you went through them, will you be changing the titles from regular, to be more descriptive to the, is that just the way you went through them?
Yes.
Those three?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. What do we have? I guess we can move right, if that's it on the previous questions, we'll move into the capital. Oh, Councilmember Nelson.
Just one more clarification on the fund balances. I still hear people saying the city of Wilmer has a lot of money, but we've gone through them a couple of times, so anything listed here under committed, do you have any additional comments about what actually, if we wanted to use some of those, are there any? I know we went through them, we've gone through them twice, but
I believe
comment still keeps being made, so.
I believe that the councils, past and present, as well as staff, have reviewed the different levels. Certainly, they're open for different philosophies, different debates, but I believe the levels that have set always can be reviewed and discussed. But anything that is not set by council policy and is not committed is always made available to the mayor to appropriate in the
Okay.
most current budget cycle. So as I mentioned, when uncompensated absences, if there's somebody that leaves or retires or the liability is reduced, those dollars are factored into available funds for the mayor to appropriate.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman Anderson. Steve, looking through this, and I was out of state on the 29th, so I wasn't available for the meeting, but I did look at the materials, and I don't recall, maybe you can refresh my memory, I don't see, we have what we call unspent funds every year from prior budgets.
Yes.
Are they, where would they be in here? And I guess I'm curious to know what the amounts might be, if you remember offhand. Or.
Yeah, the $645,000, I believe, is listed as available for the 2015 budget. I don't have it in front of me. But that $645,000 was reduced by action by the council to, I believe, accelerate the replacement of the Zamboni, which I believe was 125. So that would bring it down to about 520,000.
Thank you.
And if I remember right, that number used to be quite a bit larger typically, and I believe that had to do with interest and dividend earnings.
It typically ranged up to $1 million, and that was based on the philosophy of conservatively estimating revenues and as accurately as possible estimating expenditures.
Okay. Well, let's get into the capital program.
All right, I'm going to go through this
Oh,
presentation.
I'm sorry. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
see you
Chair.
now.
Under the committed, Steve, I mean, I know I asked you last time too, but under that committed column, what I understood was that any of that could be changed with the council.
I don't know if any of it would be the correct terminology.
All of it?
No, I wouldn't believe all of it would be either. I believe that the levels could be reviewed and changed, but even the committed in the debt service is not available. I guess I don't have the in front of me.
Well, there's a restricted column too. But
Even the committed, there may be some restrictions, but the council, again, could adjust the levels. Example would be the uncompensated absences. If you were to appropriate 100% of that, you would then have to go back and record the liability and have a method to fund it over a 10-year period by statute. That's an example where I suppose technically you could reappropriate, but you'd have to take counteraction to offset that.
refund, yeah, okay.
Again, the council has a policy of anything that is not based on council policy as far as a level set becomes available and is made available to the current mayor to be appropriated. So I guess the more accurate statement would be to discuss the levels of the committed dollar amounts.
Okay.
Can we just talk about that a little further? Because Councilmember Nelson indicated, and Councilmember Christensen is saying, people think that we've got this big pot of money in reserve. What we need to remember is that money is already spoken for, so to speak. There's very limited amounts that we can get at. If we wanted to make some major changes in policy, we could do that, but I asked before, and I think that staff might have some concerns if we started making some major changes in that. So there's not a big pot of money available for us to spend on things. All right. Once again, let's get into,
Councilmember Anderson.
yes.
That's part of the reason that I brought up the question. I think I'd like to just hear us accept that, or are there things that we should be changing so that we don't go back to this again and again and again? If we're in tune to this is how it needs to be, then or are there policies that people want to change? Otherwise, I think the council needs to agree to where we're at with the fund balances.
Okay. Councilmember Christensen.
Some of that could change during the course of the year. So, I mean, we can agree on the fund balances, but I mean, in June of 2015, something may come up, or hey, we might have to change the policy.
Just a minute, let him finish. Go ahead.
Trying to think of an example, but sometime in 2015, we may come upon something, an expenditure for whatever, that we might have to change the policy and take some money out of one of these uncommitted funds. So to say, we're going to agree that this is it for the next year, it's kind of,
Well, you're right, and I'll get
there's got to be a
we-
agreement,
And we did change some fund balances in 14 to pay for the auditorium. I mean, there were two of them that we took $250,000 out of.
yeah. Right.
Mr. Chairman, Councilman Christensen, that is correct. One of those was the Public Improvement Revolving Fund. Public Improvement Revolving Fund, again, had some restrictions set up by the council that it has to be repaid within 5 years. So there are circumstances that the council can redirect some dollars, primarily on a temporary basis until funding sources or priorities change. The one item I did call up my sheet that we did hand out at the last meeting, under the committed column, you'll see the industrial development of $6.2 million. At the end of 13, that was committed for the industrial park. It's in the capital improvement program. And so there are abilities of the council to redirect, but there are circumstances where you have a cause and effect in the process. Again, one has to remember is this is a snapshot in time, and so when you're discussing them, an update of fund balance or something that the council wants to review would be most appropriate.
Okay. Councilmember Nelson.
Just to clarify, I'm simply meant for this budget process. I mean, so that we, again, just being concerned that if there's money out there that's available, then we should be aware of that. If there's not, then I think we're accepting the fund balances as they've been laid out by policy. Not that they can't be changed in the future, but for us looking at getting this budget done for next year. That's all I meant.
Okay, and you're right. And as Steve has indicated, it's a snapshot in time, and when the budget was prepared, it was whatever was available was moved in as a revenue source. All right, I'm going to try this again. Capital program.
All right, I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly so we can have some discussion. You do have a spreadsheet that was given to you previously. If you do not have it, there are copies of it that has the entire 5-year capital plan from 2015 to 2019. We have additional copies here. I'm going to kind of summarize a little bit of our capital planning. We've been using this process since 2013. We have certain criteria we look at when we consider capital projects, legal mandates, whether it's maintaining an existing asset, if it's sustainable, does it reduce or offset the cost, is it a critical public safety need or concern, and does it meet the City Council stated priorities? And our goal, of course, is to establish a 5-year planning horizon. We have a review committee internally, and it's chaired by Bruce Peterson, the Planning and Development Services Director, Steve Oken, Sean Christensen, Jim Felton, Gary Hendrickson also all serve on that committee, and I appreciate the work that they put into it because they put quite a few hours into reviewing the projects and developing a plan. In terms of funding our capital improvements, the typical way, we've discussed this before, we fund them by bonding, which is debt service. Cash, we use unspent reserves or unspent previous capital allocations can be available. Then we have some special revenues such as the wastewater treatment fund or the local option sales tax. Cash, again, just to clarify, I mean, that unspent reserve funds are allocated from the 2012 budget year, so they're allocated from a prior year. Actually, I think it would be 2013 for this year. I'm sorry, that's an error in the presentation. Unspent previous capital allocations, the city charter does allow funding to be held over from a project. Projects that come in under budget may allow for reallocation to a new project or additional to another project. In terms of the special revenue funds, those are limited in their use. The wastewater treatment fund, that's limited to projects that are related to the waste treatment system. It's factored into the rate structure for wastewater treatment. Local option sales tax, that tax expired in December of 2013, so the dollars we have are the dollars we have. It's not renewing at this point. This is what our current plan looks like for the 5 years that we're proposing. You can see the totals there across of about 9.2 million, kind of in all categories for 2015, very similar in 2016, 2017, down to about 7.2, 8 million in 2018, and then 2019, 6.3. And that's kind of typical as you go farther out that the numbers may be lower, and part of that is that we haven't really refined the projects that are farther out. The areas of focus for 2015 focused on pavement management, facilities, new or maintenance of those facilities, furniture and equipment, plans and information technology, and then other infrastructure. The pavement management, that includes our streets, airport taxiways, parking lots, pathways. There's 13 projects. The funding sources you can see below. I'm not going to read all of those for you, but the largest source of funding is from debt service. We're proposing about $3.5 million, and the actual cash in there is rather limited at about $156,000. And there is some local option sales tax dollars that we programmed in. Most of that is going to pathways and pavement management. Facilities, again, new construction or maintenance of existing buildings or parks. We have about 13 projects proposed. Those are funded more heavily from cash, about almost $500,000 from cash. State aid, that might be in some matching dollars or some federal dollars. And then in one case, we have private, and that really deals with the Taunton Stadium project. There would be a portion of that. If that project went forward, we would expect the leasees to pay for.
Could I stop you just for
Sure.
a minute, Mr. Chair? Just, I'm interested in the numbers that we're seeing here on the past 2, 3, 4 slides. Do we have that somewhere?
They are right here in front of you. I mean, I've just summarized them. I just have, those are the subtotals in the categories.
Okay, but not in that format.
Not in that, yeah,
I find that interesting, and if we could have, like, the
I can
last
get
two,
you.
three slides.
Sure, we can get you a copy of those. We can upload that.
Okay, thank you.
Furniture and equipment, looking at 6 projects, primarily cash funding. There is some state aid, and that is for a project that's at the airport. And I believe that project is for the airfield electric backup generator. And then planning and information technology includes master planning for the airport and transportation, and it actually includes a number of technology upgrades. There are about 7 projects that are listed there. You see there that we have some funding coming from Cable Reserve that we were programming in for our information technology. Some of that is from wastewater treatment. That, again, is some technology related, and it's their share of some things such as software and computer software and virtualization software, as well as some computer hardware. And then we have kind of this other category we have where everything didn't kind of fit neatly into one of our previous categories. There are 4 projects, primarily stormwater or some wastewater. The funding there is primarily from the wastewater treatment fund, and then also from stormwater funds. That's all told about $1 million in projects there for those 4 projects. And then I think the best way to handle questions would be to take actually a look more at the detailed projects on the spreadsheet, and we've got those, have copies of those if you haven't. Certainly we'll answer any questions about the specific projects. For the pavement management or for vehicles, might hold off on those questions because we'll be dealing with that next. And there are a number of directors here can ask specific questions. A couple of them do need to leave early for a couple of prior commitments, so I think if you have questions primarily for maybe Mr. Brizendine or Mr. Hendrickson, now would be a good time to start with those, because they have some commitments to get to some other meetings and a open house at the firehouse. And Scott Ledewar is also here and can maybe answer some of the part questions after Mr. Brizendine's left.
What I hope we can do is get through this segment, come to consensus so that we're done with this portion. I don't know that we need to vote on everything, but we'll look for consensus. And at the end, at our final budget meeting, we'll have all of that compiled. So we'll be looking for consensus so that the capital improvement program will be done when we're done tonight. All right. Councilmember Christensen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are we just going to be looking at the 2015 and not 16, 17, 18, 19?
I think we should.
I think primarily, but if you have questions about the other years, we'd certainly happy to answer those as well.
But I think our emphasis needs to be 15 right now, but.
Okay. One question I have several, but one interesting one is, of all the cash outlays on here, what are some of them that could be used toward street repair? Is there
what?
anything in the cash outlays for our CIP program, any of that could be used for street repair?
It certainly can. It would just mean deferring these projects and such. And so, I mean, the cash is available for projects beyond, for street projects. It just means that it would defer other maintenance or defer facilities or defer parks in order to do so.
I guess that question might be directed at maybe some of the department heads under their, not under pavement management, but under their facilities and new maintenance or furniture. Is there anything under any of the departments that could be delayed, or, because we're going to need some money for street improvements. I mean, not just.
I want to interject one thing if I could.
Sure.
I have an idea, my idea alone, when we come into other funding sources for a street repair thing. I've gotten a couple of pieces of information from staff, but I mean, I think your question is fine. If there's some things that could go out, realizing that if they go out this year, they got to come back next year. Right? At some point in time, these things need to be done.
Some of the specific ones I'm looking at is rebuilding the Orange Field infield and replacing the cinder warning track for $50,000. Our softball program, orange is the baseball one, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? Okay. That one gets used quite a bit, so I'll chalk that one off. Taunton Field Storm Shelter, which I understand is a federal match. It's listed under the fire department. Is that because of the storm issue thing, or?
Yeah, I'll let
and
Mr.
what-
Hendrickson speak to that project, and I think,
Councilman Anderson, members of council, the 25% match or the $100,000 that I requested as a placeholder, it is a grant, $300,000 roughly, saying it's a $400,000 building. 25% would need to be matched from the local entity. That's providing we were able to get the grant. The closest entity around here that has received a safe room grant is Paynesville, and they received it, I believe, last year. So if for some reason, the reason I put it in there was basically more or less to get approval and move forward with applying for the grant. If there's no need for me to move forward in applying for the grant, then that $100,000 would be available for another project in some capacity.
Is it a necessary item? I mean, that storm shelter at the stadium, is it because of the volume of people out there at any given time, or?
Yeah, from my perspective, it is. We have all the softball fields out there, Taunton Stadium. Back in probably, 10 years ago, I believe the stadium did go through a severe storm or potentially a tornado at that time. And with 1,000 people there, plus all the other softball fields that are being used at the time, there is no place for them to go to if there was a severe storm of that nature that maybe just kind of came out of nowhere. Definitely can be delayed without a doubt if that's your desire, but it's just an opportunity, I guess, to take advantage of some federal funding and provide some safety for the community.
I mean, a $400,000 building is to sit there for a storm shelter. I hope it would be used for something else also. I mean, it's just,
Yep, and I came up with, Councilman Christian, that $400,000 was actually come up from the Stingers organization presented a building plan some time ago, probably about when I first started. So I just kind of used that number as kind of a storage facility, their office facility, kind of use that number. Understand with the safe rooms that the federal government will only pay for the portions that are physically used for the safe room. So if there's a bathroom, if there's an office, that would not be considered. So I kind of took just a round number, I guess, based on what was given to us by an architect about a year and a half ago.
so it would be dual purpose then.
Correct.
Next one is the backstop replacement of 5 fields at Swanson for $30,000. That's another one that,
I don't know if either Scott or Mr. Brizendine, I mean, many of these are, I guess I would say they can be delayed, but they're in the capital program because we've gone through this process and determining these need to be addressed, and they can be delayed another year or two, but that's kind of how we've gotten into this position of having deferred maintenance by continuing to push projects further down the road. But Mr. Brizendine maybe can talk to the condition of those.
Councilmember Anderson and the rest of the committee and council members, Ms. Stevens spoke exactly to what our issues are there. Those facilities are in the neighborhood, well, they were built in the late 70s, early 80s, so they're 30, 35 years old and have had a number of repairs done to them, but no wholesale changes, and we've reached the end of the useful life of much of our infrastructure out at that facility, and that's what we've done here is put placeholders in to accommodate some updating of all the facilities at that park area. Same with the orange field, Mr. Christensen, to get to your point earlier as well, that the warning tracks are not just the orange field, but it's all the softball fields out there as well. So there's more work getting done with that 50,000 than just orange field. But your point is well taken that all those facilities are heavily used from when the snow disappears until the snow comes. So we're just now finishing up fall leagues out at that facility. So they are very well used, and due to that usage, much of the equipment is in disrepair. And as you state, yes, can it be put off? There aren't a lot of things that are true safety hazards. The staff at Public Works does a wonderful job of keeping things safe for participants, but many of those repairs are at the last stages of being useful for us.
how about top dressing that soccer field, the Westman Park, the fields? Is that,
That's the open space sitting there. We are, I wouldn't say we're at a severe shortage of soccer fields because we think we've got enough fields. What we were hoping to do there was to create another practice and youth facility, and that park is sitting there empty at this time, not being utilized in any way, and we thought that was our first steps of actually using the Westwind Park area, was to get it top-dressed and available for soccer. It seemed to be a pretty minimal expense to get something utilized from a park system perspective, but yes, that could be delayed as well.
Because that becomes a maintenance issue also. I mean, once we do it, we're going to have to maintain it for soccer, and not just mow it.
Right, yeah, we're maintaining it to the degree that it is right now, and then with the soccer field, it gets, what, Scott, probably twice the mowing than what it's getting right now, so, yes.
Okay. The K-9 program, I noticed later on we're looking at a donation. Is that to fund our share of that?
Yes,
We
that
got-
would
we
be,
got
and actually, that may come out because we expect, yeah, I mean, if, depending on the action that is taken later this evening, that could come out, and that project could be done in 2014. It would not be funded in 2015, but it would be the city's portion of a K-9.
But would that mean that we have to continue at 6,000 a year, or is this just,
No, I don't believe
Final
it's
one.
6,000 per year. Chief Felt can speak to that, but that is ours to get it up and running. We still have the K-9 vehicle and such, and there would be some there would be some ongoing expenses, but not to the tune of 6,000 a year. They would be absorbed into the police department's operating budget after this.
okay, that's fine. Then I go to the, I know somebody explained the City Hall thin clients, but what is it? $125,000 in the IT department, but
Instead of replacing and having kind of computer desktops at every desk by thin clients, you can have essentially a virtual machine, and the programs run off of it, but you're not having to have the hard drive and the hard drive space and such. And so it's kind of creating virtual machines, which in the long run is more efficient and more cost-effective.
and we're definitely going to do that? Is that-
Well, that's what's
that why it's on
proposed.
here?
I mean, that's why it's proposed in here, to move in that direction.
Okay, and then right below that is the City Hall permit system. I see it's 25 grand. Will that speed it up at all?
Mr. Peterson, would you like to respond to that? What your expectation is with the City Hall permit system?
Chairman Anderson, members of the committee, the permit system is not just for land use permits or building permits. It would be for all permitting that would come from the city. It would provide some coordination among the system. Our building permit system we have right now is extremely antiquated and was actually jerry-rigged by a former IT person that we contracted with that used the basis or the guts of a system out of the city of Woodbury to come up with our system. It does function. It doesn't allow for the degree of flexibility that we need internally. I don't know that this software will in and of itself speed up the process. We have very credible turnaround times right now, and this will simply provide for better record keeping, better documentation, and gives us more flexibility to get into the permit system and make adjustments to permits that are issued or to void permits, unlike the system we have right now.
Is it software, or what?
It is software.
$25,000 for it. Wow.
In the arena of permitting software, that's budget software.
Somebody's making money, that's good. Just a quick one on the 2016 budget.
Okay.
I noticed that there's fire department's looking for $35,000 for extrication equipment, and we have a county rescue squad that's got 3 trucks fully equipped for extrication. I'm wondering where that's coming from.
Councilman Christensen, currently that is correct. However, timeliness of, not to throw anyone under the bus, but timeliness is to respond within the golden hour can be a challenge. With them having 2 trucks, they are a countywide service, especially in the wintertime. If they're in Sunburg or if they're down south someplace, that leaves the citizens and the citizens that travel through this community at risk of us not having the ability to extricate them from their vehicle. In my personal opinion, it's a small amount to generate customer service to those that come through the community. No different than providing a gun range or an archery range or whatever in that capacity.
But we're trying to consolidate. Now, we did the emergency management 7-hour position, and the county's got it. We could have increased theirs. And I would say that the county rescue squad, if we have a lack of enough people for it, why not build that instead of have two separate entities? I mean, it's governed by the taxpayers' dollars. I mean, I guess I don't understand the need for that. I would rather see the Canada County Rescue Squad then expand if we really think it's necessary, rather than have two departments doing the same thing. I mean, it just, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense.
We can certainly look at that as we look at the 2016.
Okay, thank you. That's all I
Okay,
have.
Councilmember DeBleek?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Anderson, Chairman Anderson. Question yet on the City Hall thin clients? You had the 125,000 for that. On your presentation, you said that 125 was coming from the RAC 8 reserves.
Correct.
Did we not spend those reserves this year?
We accounted for this. We accounted for this when we
thought we had
for
taken
the
those.
auditorium. Yes.
Taking those reserves for the auditorium.
We took all but the 125. And so we were accounting for the 125 being used in 2015, and we transferred the remaining over for the auditorium this year.
I
So,
think it was
that-
close to a $300,000 balance there.
yeah. So between, if this project is done, then that would
If
be
this
the end.
project's approved, that would take the
That would
RAC
be-
8 reserves
that
to
would- correct.
basically zero.
Correct. Correct. That would be the plan. If it's not done, then there would be 125,000 that would be left within RAC 8, so.
And that's not the RAC 8 operating budget, that's just their reserve.
Reserves, that's just their reserves. Yeah. Yeah, and the operating budget for RAC 8 was transferred over a couple of years ago into the general fund. It's no longer a separate, but it's part of information technology.
Roof repairs at Public Works Garage, 125,000, 120,000 out of cash. Is that a basic roof repair, or is there some energy improvements built into that? What is that project all going to
I
include?
think I'll either have Mr. Christensen or Mr. Letterbor speak to the extent of that project.
Councilmember Leek, that is the section of roof on it's actually the newest part of the Public Works Garage, but it's all one continuous roof. It's the part over the mechanics area and in that center section. So it's a large section of roof. There will be some insulation added to that at that time.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to see, if we have an opportunity to add some energy improvements to that building, it'd be a good time to do it. Park rehab and play equipment resurfaces $100,000. What does that all include for parks and equipment?
That is a number that we've placed in there. I mean, previously, we've spent about $30,000 a year has been the number. The actual request was about $200,000. We weren't able to fund that full request in 2015. You can see in 2016 and out years, then we did try to increase that to $200,000. But that $100,000 would be used for replacement or repair of any park equipment. It may also be used for anything, for something that comes out of the park plan.
And then we have the, I'm counting the Hayden Path, County Road 41 path, Robbins Islands Beach path, Lakeland Drive path, and sidewalks, bike paths, new construction. Does that complete the walking bike path, fill in all the gaps that we have to make the circumference around the city?
I don't know if that does fill in the gaps. I'm seeing Mr. Peterson shake his head no. I think we're making progress, but not getting all the gaps filled in. But I think if you want, do you know, could somebody answer maybe how many miles that is, or how many miles it leaves us?
I think that would probably leave. I believe that would probably leave the section along the golf course road as the major link that's not closed right now in getting around the city. There'll be some other smaller gaps, but by far the largest one will be alongside the county road by the golf course. And there are very limited options.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions as well. On the top of the second page, the master plan update listed for the airport. What does that involve?
Public Works Director can describe kind of what's involved in the master planning update with the airport.
Chairman Anderson, that every 5 to 10 years, the FAA and the state, I wouldn't say require, but highly recommend these master plan updates to maintain the integrity of the airport and maintain the future of the airport. And so all this is an update on our current master plan, and you'll see that every 5 to 10 years, I'd imagine.
Okay, I see most of it's state aid, but wow, that's an expensive update. Then the other question I have is on Civic Center Drive stormwater pond. Does that have to be just cleaned out, or is it?
Yeah, Chairman Anderson, that's exactly what it is. If you've driven by there, it doesn't even look like a pond anymore. And so it's been quite a few years. I don't remember the exact number, but it's been quite a few years since that has been cleaned out, and it's due to be done again.
Okay. Other, Councilmember Nelson?
I'd just like to go back to Mr. Bresendine on the community ed and rec ones. Are you not leveraging also some donation money for some of those projects that are on there? Just in remembering some conversations that have gone on. I know the baseball boosters have offered, and so I'm just curious about that. And also, if I remember correctly, the warning tracks on all the fields are a safety issue, if I understood correctly. That there's a few injuries out there, and what's out there, I've actually walked them, but they're in not good shape at all. I just wondered if you would comment about those.
I'll comment, Councilmember Nelson and the rest of the committee and members. I would comment on the safety of the ball fields with the old cinder tracks. Indeed, the warning tracks are more of a hazard than they are a warning for the players, because what you do is you transition from firm grass and hit these soft cinder areas, and people are wiping out and flying into the fences. What's happened doesn't happen a lot, and we haven't had any injuries, but that is a hazard out there. So our game plan is to yank out all the cinders and replace that with AgriLime, which is what the infield material is at those ball fields. As for the rest of the projects, when we get an opportunity to partner up with organizations like the baseball boosters, so some of these things we'll partner with them and reduce our costs in hopes of leveraging dollars that they've got available and stretching things a little further. Another example that's not on here is we're working on the scoreboard project as well with them and trying to find advertising to help us match those dollars. But yes, much of the fence work, we hope to have some partnerships created, and whether that's through the school associations or some park dollars that are found through grants, that's our hope for some of these projects.
Thank you.
Was that it, or did you have another question?
Oh, yes.
You have another question?
No, I think I'm okay with that, other than just a general comment. Would you just speak to the numbers of the usage out on those fields? I know that question has come up, and I know that the women's softball numbers were down, but I believe the co-rec and men's numbers are up. Speak to that. And then if you wouldn't also share about the park plan tomorrow night, that would be great.
I'll start with the park plan. The next phase of our park planning process, working with SRF Consulting, is tomorrow night at the fire station from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. They will be bringing draft copies of the work that they've done in Wilmer over the last month and a half for the public to comment upon. At 5:30, they'll do a short presentation on the work that they've done and hopes of creating more conversation and more inputs from the public about this plan. So the more people that show up tomorrow at the fire station from 5 to 7, the more input we'll get, and thus we hope that'll be a better plan for the community of Wilmer. As for the numbers from participants, yes, the ladies softball organization has We did not run a women's league this year because of numbers, but that has been offset by other leagues. Mostly our co-rec leagues have had record numbers the last few years. We've reached capacity with those leagues. The church league has been very popular, as well as the men's program. On a weekly basis between softball and the soccer program, we've got roughly about 1,000 adults participating in recreational activities throughout the course of the summer. So what we did with when the women's league disbanded this year, we moved youth programming out to those fields. So those fields are getting used Monday through Thursday, along with whatever weekends and other evening work that associations and other people utilize those facilities. So Swanson Field Complex is a very, very busy place on a daily basis. As I said earlier, from the minute the snow is gone, the fields have firmed up enough to play upon until the first snow flies. So yes, between the youth and adults, well over 1,000 people using those fields on a weekly basis. And that doesn't count the Baker usage.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Councilmember Christensen?
Just a quick question. Do we have a balance of the local option sales tax after this year? Is there anything left? Is that, did it spend it all? 968?
15, right?
I believe the amount that you have programmed for the bike path will zero that out if that is approved.
Okay, because that's a chunk of money for the bike path. That's a,
It basically is the amount that was returned because of the market value adjustment, which is about 800,000, 750 to 800,000, if I remember right.
wow.
The rest is earmarked for, I know that the Western Collector is just being finalized, so I don't know if it came in at what was budgeted or if there might be some available there. But the rest of it is earmarked for the either the Civic Center proposed project in the 14 budget and or the industrial park. And I don't know where those projects are as far as status.
So the reason we were logging in that $838,000 was because it was meant for bike paths in the Civic Center and the industrial park. So that's the reason we're putting it there? There's not any, or is that the price they've come up with that's going to take to do that path?
I believe the 838 is the price they've come up with to do the Lakeland. We have used the local option sales tax for either civic center projects, trail projects, or the industrial park, which is what the kind of referendum was. But the 838 is the estimate to complete that Lakeland path.
Okay, and then once again, that money, that local option sales tax money can be used by anything the council,
Correct. The council could
Determined.
take action to use that money differently.
even though it's pegged for this 868. I just want to make that
Yep.
clear. 'Cause
I just want, we can. I think we need to be careful,
Because
because the voters, allowed us to do that with certain projects in mind.
keep in mind that streets are bike paths. Streets are bike paths. Go to Phoenix, Mesa, all the bike paths are part of the streets, so they can maintain them easier. So, just a comment.
Okay, I'd kind of like to wrap up this section in the next little bit of time on the proposed capital improvements. I mean, the only thing that I got definitively that isn't definite, is maybe $6,000 will come out with the canine program. Maybe. Anyone want to state a case for something to be removed?
Just clarification on the K-9 program, because we approved that once before, and the police department requested that we delay that. So we actually did approve it once before because they've had people who wanted to make a donation, and because of the change in staff out there, that
It
was
is included
delayed.
in the 2014 budget.
Okay.
Because of that. And there is, later before there is some action, I think, at Public Works, Public Safety, I think, that is looking at that tomorrow evening and such. But there is money that's allocated in the 2014 budget. We did not feel it was going to be, at one point, the police department did not feel that the project was going to occur in 2014, but there was still an interested donor, and so it was moved to 2015. If the project occurs in 2014, we would
Okay.
remove it from the 2015 budget.
Thank you.
Okay. Then, we're going to put that aside, and we're going to talk about vehicles.
All right. Public Works Director Christensen is going to give a presentation on vehicles and street maintenance. And I'll excuse the couple of staff members who need to go because they've got some others. It's the right on this, right? Yeah, use the gray ones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going to try to go quickly through some of these things. I've got both the both the vehicles and the streets in the same PowerPoint, so we'll kind of go through the vehicles one first. I'll pause. If there's any questions I can clarify or answers we can do. I've got Scott in the audience as well. He can answer if I can't. Otherwise, I think we've got pretty much most of it here in the details in this presentation. So this is, the beginning of this presentation would be basically your replacement policy that years ago, a number of years ago, that the council approved this policy, and it's I want to stress that this is the policy that the staff, the department heads, are trying to follow this policy. And so if we need to change policy, that's all well and good, and then we'll endeavor to follow whichever policy the council would like to adopt. So I won't read it. You got it. You've approved it. You probably know it better than I do at this point. But this is a replacement policy. It's that it was adopted a number of years ago, and it's what we're trying to endeavor to follow. This particular page gives the useful life of the different vehicles, all the different vehicles that might be involved in the city of Willmar fleet, and so these are the years of service that we're trying to follow when we ask for these replacements of the vehicles. More details on the procedure on how that goes. There's a database set up that's involved in every vehicle. The history of each of these vehicles is kept, the mechanics history as well as the maintenance history. This gives you just a small or a quick rundown, quick summary, if you will, of just the 2015 and only the Public Works Department vehicles that are requested for next year. And you can see there's, and once again, they follow the recommended service life based on the policy that's been adopted. So we've got a number of different mowers, got a couple trucks, and then the other thing I'd like to stress is that 3 vehicles, 2 trucks and a chipper have already been removed from 2015 in an effort to even out the years over the next 5 years, and those have been pushed into 17, so have delayed those 3 items for 2 years. This is an example. This one, I don't even know if it's being replaced this next year. This is an example of a form that's filled out by each department, by each vehicle, by the staff member. What happens is there's 3 different signatures on there. It's the operator who typically operates this device or this vehicle, the supervisor, the mechanic, as well as the department head all sign off and are allowed to make comments on each particular vehicle. And this happens for every vehicle that's replaced each year. This gives you a little bit of rundown of the different tasks involved with the Public Works vehicles. I say vehicles loosely. It's actually equipment. It's, if you want to look at it that way, it's the tools that the Public Works Department uses. It's their tools to do the work that they are assigned to do. So just a quick rundown. Of course, you can see it there. 133 miles of streets. Some of the bigger numbers that stick out: 60 miles of storm sewers, 100 miles of sanitary sewers, 255 acres of mowed park weekly, 300 acres of mowed areas that are 4 times a year, are some of the larger numbers. 1,600 fire hydrants, 16,000 boulevard trees that we're maintaining. And so while the list of equipment or tools seems quite extensive at the Public Works, so are the amount of duties that that equipment's asked to do. The replacement policy, I got a short history and more of information for me, as well as anyone who may not know. It was originally created, as far as we went back, it was created in 2009. There may have been a program or policy prior to that, but that was when it was adopted in 2009. It was updated in 2012 and then again this current year. The Vehicle Replacement Committee includes, I think you mentioned this earlier, actually, no, that was the Civil Capital Improvement. So some of the same members, Fire Chief, Chief of Police, myself, Scott Letterbore, and Steve Okins is on that committee. I think, yeah, that's it for the vehicles. If there's any questions on the vehicles specifically, I can endeavor to ask those or answer those.
And we didn't address the emergency vehicles because it was our understanding that that wasn't what you folks want, that the primary look was at the Public Works vehicles, so that's why those weren't covered. Although that you have those again in front of you, there's a spreadsheet that you should have, that you had before. If you don't, we have additional copies of it as well.
Does everyone have this? I want to make sure.
I'll take one.
Here.
Okay.
It's in my other office.
Pardon me?
It's in my other office.
Yeah, okay. You had a question?
Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Chair. The information you had up at the stats on like 16,000 boulevard trees and that, is that something you could email to us too? That's interesting stuff I should
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
We can get you copies of all the PowerPoints. We'll upload them to the budget file on your iPads and such tomorrow, so.
Okay, thank you.
Oops, too far. Yeah, some of that was quite interesting. Councilmember Christensen, more than I had even anticipated. So.
Councilmember Nelson?
Just a question on our actual policy. As we compare to other cities our size, I mean, is this a kind of a standard for length of use and those types of things? I'm just curious what other communities are doing.
They are fairly standard. I mean, you know, the years of service, hours of service, I mean, those are standard fleet management parameters that folks, ours might be a little different, but they're based upon that kind of standard, having been in other communities and looked at and fleet management. I mean, these are kind of the general rule of thumb.
Okay.
Councilmember Amon had asked, and I thought we were going to talk a little bit about if we delayed some vehicles from 2015 into 2016, and if you have any particular thoughts on that, or...
Again, we have delayed some. I mean, as we put together the 2015, and Sean and Scott can go back over that again, we already delayed 3 of the purchases because of the numbers and trying to kind of smooth out the curve, if you would, in our equipment purchases, and you'll kind of see that in the kind of totals, but there are 3 vehicles that were already moved from 2015 out to 2017. Maybe you want to, in case people
How
can't see
many
those.
dollars did that involve? I'm not sure I can read.
Maybe you can summarize that, Sean.
Yeah, Councilmember Anderson, you're looking at $425,000, $430,000 in just those 3 vehicles that was delayed for 2 years.
And those vehicles, can you explain what
Yep.
they do?
They're two trucks as well as a chipper. And then he's got listed up there, and once again, we'll get this email to everybody. The winter use, of course, on both trucks would be they're route trucks. One of them was West Side and Holland Snow, and the other one is actually First Street. The summer use of each of those trucks would be tree material, sand, gravel, and things of that nature. The chipper, of course, is fall and winter use for trimming trees.
What was the decision process when you went from 15 to 17? You didn't go to 16. Why did you push it 2 years?
Right, Councilmember Anderson. I think the issue becomes when you delay anything, streets, vehicles, building maintenance, any of this stuff, it's a dangerous game because you're pushing things, you're pushing dollars into another year that already has dollars associated with that. So we're taking a risk with those 3 particular vehicles that they can do another 2 years. Because 16 already has, I can't remember the exact dollars in it, but 16 already has quite a few dollars in it, and 17 had a smaller gap, or had less dollars allotted for the entire year. And so that was what we chose to do and push those into that year. We've got, like I say, we've got maintenance records, and he's got it listed up there on each of these vehicles. In fact, those 2 particular trucks, actually, if you just do all 3 of those vehicles that we've maintained, for the life of that vehicle, since we've had them, we're looking at, $25,000 that we've already spent just in maintenance costs on those vehicles. And so obviously, as that curve gets, as these get older, you're gonna spend more money on those.
Okay. Councilmember Fagerly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many mechanics do we have out there? Is it 2 or just 1?
Get the,
Okay, and they're car mechanics or they're truck mechanics?
They do portions of both. As equipment is more complicated, a lot of times nowadays, you probably need a computer to diagnose some of the engine and electrical issues. But they are able to do the welding, brake replacement, oil changes, repairs to plows, and, a lot of the general maintenance.
Yeah, they're handymen too, so they fix hoses and plows and all that. Because I noticed when I came back into town today, there was a dump truck at Nelson's International, so I don't know what.
Yeah, there again, that was an issue with a truck that our mechanics couldn't fix, and it required them to put it on a diagnostic machine.
Okay, thank you.
anyone else? I want to make sure we're done with this. I don't want to, Mr. Mayor.
I have a question on who makes a decision regarding the replacement of the vehicles?
Well, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Anderson, the way that's set up in the policy that was formally adopted by the council, we make the decision based on years, either miles or hours of service on these vehicles based on the recommendations in the policy.
Can I ask you who we is?
The staff, the 3 people that sign those documents, so it'd be the operator, the mechanic, in this case, the superintendent, and then myself as a department head. We look at that together and we say, is this vehicle, can it go again? Can it be going another year or can it not, based on the life expectancy of that particular vehicle?
And in addition to that, the committee reviews all of those requests to make sure that the department is being unbiased, I guess, in looking at their vehicles, and that, is it following the repair, is it following the policy and the cycle and replacement cycle? What does that maintenance look like? And they make that recommendation as well. So that's how it's done.
And that committee is made up of yourself, the police chief, the fire chief, Mr. Letterbor, and
Mr. Okins.
Mr. Okins. So, I mean, the staff is making that decision. Okay, yes.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to move on if we didn't, if this takes care of it. Councilmember Hammond.
Well, first of all, appreciate everybody looking at that expense that we have with the city. And I remember approving this policy years ago. I believe it was back in the 90s when we decided to, rather than deal with every catastrophic breakdown or replacement vehicles and the lobbying between different department heads, to purchase a vehicle based on their needs. Of course, the primary ones being the fire department and the police department, to make sure they had secure and safe vehicles was our ultimate goal, and that's not the reason why I brought this idea up. I just think the more money we put into it, the more we're gonna spend. And I just look at vehicles that are after 10 years old. Talking with a lot of salespeople, that a vehicle virtually is worth nothing. Very limited is whatever the person can get out of it, and I question, based on the years of being on the council, how many times we've had catastrophic breakdowns of vehicles where they had major improvements, engines, transmissions, or rear ends, or major components that needed to be repaired. And I find them to be very, very limited. What I've seen on our expenses, monthly expenses. I've not seen that, nor have we had requests of that sort. And so, just a simple issue of economics. I'm just looking at the idea of delaying those purchases for 1 or 2 more years. I don't care what they look like. I don't care if there's rust or paint missing. I just want them to be safe. I want them to go down the road. It's a work vehicle, and some of these vehicles, I think, based on the encounters I've had with people that have purchased their vehicles at the garage, is that they're in very good mechanical shape, yet we're getting rid of them. They might look a little rusty, but I guess I question why we're putting this amount of money into it, and I would much rather see the budget reduced by about $500,000 on our vehicles and put the money back into the taxpayers' pocket, and that's to maintain the streets that we're not maintaining. They're wearing out, and I think it would be a better allocation of funds for the public. I think they would appreciate their roads being seal-coated and crack-sealed, since in the general budget we are supposed to be taking care of that, and we're not, which is eroding the life of those streets that they've paid for. And I think this is just a simple economic issue. We could do this another way, too, looking at all these budgets. Everybody has their opinions on things, but where the money should be spent, there's a lot of needs. What it comes down to is how much you want to raise the levy. And, you know, you could just simply say, staff, cut everything by 1% or 2%. We wouldn't have to be dealing with this. You know, we're dealing with micromanaging this budget and vehicles, and I hate to get into that. What it comes down to is we as council people have to say, either we're going to spend more money and ask it from the constituents or not. So I question whether we should.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
I have two thoughts, and then I'll, whatever anybody else. You know, if we think that our policy is wrong as far as how long the useful life is, then we should change policy, I think, because these folks are operating under guidelines that we've given, and it's right in the policy, the recommended useful life, and it says on the bottom that was reviewed and approved April of 2013. So we said that was okay. So, you know, if we want to have a discussion about that, I think that's appropriate. My concern, the second thing is my concern about delaying the purchase for a year or for 2 years. You get the money then, but at some point in time, you have to make that up. You have to spend it. It's not free money. I mean, there's an expense involved in replacing these vehicles. So I'm not sure that I can go along with that theory. I really think the better way to do it is to look at our policy itself. That's my thoughts. Anyone else have anything? Otherwise, we're gonna move on. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at the community service officer vehicles. One is a 2011 Caravan and one is a 2012, and they got them scheduled for replacement in 16 and 17 for $40,000 and $41,000. Again, that vehicle gets driven around Wilmer only. I don't want to micromanage, but this is looking at it. This is my opinion. It's driven around Wilmer only. Why would they need a brand-new $40,000 vehicle for a community service officer?
Well, let's let the chief
respond to that.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, I am not familiar with that. I didn't bring the vehicle replacement plan for the police department with me, but that is something we can certainly look at pushing out further. Typically those vehicles are kept for, I believe, 5 years, has been the normal practice, and by that time, a considerable number of miles on them and in-town miles. So certainly something that we could look at and move back if appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly look at that again. It kind of goes to the point by Chair Anderson. I mean, they're being replaced now under the policy and under the guidelines of miles and hours of use and years and such.
I have a question of the committee. If something falls under the category that, yeah, okay, it meets the criteria, but then you take into account, like what Councilmember Christensen is saying, you know, it hasn't had much use. Do you folks sometimes say no, or does the city administrator say no, or is it just automatically put in?
Well, I think a good example is the ones that we just pushed out, the 3 vehicles, as we looked at those numbers, and it really wasn't a, that would have put our vehicles for 2015 at almost 1.6, looked further out and seeing that we had this kind of big bubble or bump in the process, and so we moved some of those out to 2017 to try to smooth that out. So we've already, you know, we have done that in looking at it. I think what we're saying is that those are still tools that we need. whether we purchase them in 2015, we can extend their life perhaps to 2017, and we're hoping that we can, and we're hoping that that repair and all of that cost doesn't really get to be more than we expect it to, but it's still a tool that we need. I mean, those 2 trucks are still service plows. Those are needed every winter and such, and so if one of those trucks were to go down and out of service, well, we will have made a critical error in pushing those trucks out, because we don't have a spare truck. So it would simply, if something occurs with one of those trucks in 15 or 16 or 17 before it's replaced, we will have made a critical error, and we will suffer through that with a lesser service, frankly, because we don't have a spare to put in service.
Councilmember Anderson, I think that happens quite often I've only been on the committee obviously this year since I just got here, but the other good example is the 2 engineering vehicles that are up in 15, I know have been pushed back at least twice. One of them is a 99, one is an 01, and so yes, that happens quite frequently when we try to either even dollars out amongst the years, or we actually physically talk about what those vehicles are used for and how they're used and how hard they're used. What type of miles, what type of hours are put on those vehicles, and have a discussion about that.
And our goal is really to try to replace the vehicles. We're trying to hit that sweet spot before when we've kind of used up most of its useful life, but before a major repair. Because if we keep the vehicle long enough for us to have a transmission failure, and then we have no choice but to replace that transmission, we really don't ever recoup that cost, and it's not the same vehicle again. And so we're trying to replace them really kind of before they fail, and get as much useful life out of them as we can.
I think it's a useful discussion to have these questions answered. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I agree. I mean, I think this is the most thorough discussion we've had on capital or vehicle replacement ever. And it's good to bring it up. Public gets to be aware of it. And I have 2 other ones on here. I see we're looking at 2 new Bobcats. We just purchased one this year. We traded in one from Public Works. And it says on here that the Civic Center wants one for $60,000 next year, and Public Works wants another one in 2016 for $60,000. Now, I'm assuming that the departments share this equipment. I don't know if the Bobcat's used every day, or if, I suspect that they should be sharing it.
I think Mr. Letterboard could speak to that. And
Councilmember Christensen, I believe that both of those are the toolkit, where it allows you to do multi-functions. It's not just the Bobcat in itself. We do share all the time. We share attachments and stuff for the Bobcat equipment, but both of those are the toolkit. Ours is more specific for the increasing bike path miles what we're getting. We're over 17 miles now. We need to move a little faster on snow removal, sweeping, and bike paths and that kind of stuff. I can't speak to the Civic Center exactly how they're going to use theirs, but we do share it.
Because it's not just the equipment you're buying the maintenance of it also. And yeah, I agree. I see the fire department also is looking at another $500,000 vehicle in 16. Laverne Commander, whatever Laverne Commander 2 is, I don't know, but
the fire pumper.
it's another pumper. Yeah, I'm very pleased that we're having this discussion.
Councilmember Fagerly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment on vehicles and van replacement. Usually they input a high number, and by the time you get around to bidding them out locally or with the state contract, they come in lower. So then there's extra money there. So.
Yeah, true.
Just one more thing, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Certainly.
I can safely assume that all of these, we're going to approve them on the CIP, but they'll all become before the appropriate committees, before the dollars are spent, like we had said before.
That's our policy.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to add one more thing on the toolkit for the Civic Center. That is actually multi-purpose beyond the fact of just being able to put a mower, a brush hog, a loader, whatever you want on the front of that thing. It's also going to be replacing the current forklift that's up there that is not up to code. And so that one specifically is extremely multi-purpose up there.
All right. Well, let's talk about pavement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along with some of the same theme you've been hearing all night already. Anytime you deal with management, whether it's vehicles or pavement or buildings or, parks, anything like that, you've got to keep up with the program to maintain what we got going on. So a lot of this is going to be a history. I'm going to endeavor to sell, if you will, or talk more about and discuss or describe more of the pavement management program that's been in place since 1995, and try to do a better job of showing that to everyone and so hopefully answering everybody's questions. This is a little bit of history of the city of Wilmer. As I mentioned earlier, we have 133 roughly miles of streets. Those are broke down, as you can see on the chart, into percentages. Might be a better number to deal with rather than the actual miles, but over 60% of it is in local streets, and then 15 in municipal state aid, 10% in county state aid, and then some other smaller slivers of the pie in additional types of streets that we have in town. This one's a little hard to read. Once again, you'll get copies of all this, but this would be and I may have this one out of order, so I may have to come back to this one later, but this would be a typical example of a street maintenance history, if you will. We got a database on all streets in town, and these two particular streets, what this database shows is an original year that it was built, when and if it was reconstructed, what year that would be, when it was overlaid, when it was seal coated, when it was crack sealed, and it keeps track of all these things. And the reason this slide is in here, like I say, it's a little bit out of order here, but and I apologize for that. The reason I put this slide in here is that it kind of shows that if you maintain this, and I'll show a chart on this later, about every 7-year cycle to do some type of maintenance on these streets seems to be the best secret, if you will, the best policy to maintain these streets to get as much useful life out of these streets as possible. But as far as history goes, in 1967 we had just 73 miles of streets up to, like I say, today. This shows 2009, but today we have 133 miles, so we've got twice as many streets as we had in 1967. As just a kind of a FYI, the reconstructed streets for a 10-year period from 98 to 09 was just under 30 miles, whereas we reconstructed in the next 5-year section only 10 miles or 11 miles, so a third of that section. So we have been rebuilding less streets. There's multiple reasons for that. The cost obviously is gone fairly high, as well as if we can maintain these streets, we in the future we'll have to rebuild less streets each time. Full reconstruct. Overlays in contrast, that same 10-year period from 98 to 09, we had just under 18 miles, and then the next 5 years we had just over 8, and so you can see that's about half for 5 years versus 10 years, and so kind of give you a comparison of what we're doing with the streets in this currently. This chart here is a good chart. You see it listed in a lot of DOTs, a lot of local and county public works departments. And what this says is basically the first 75% of the useful life of a street, you have the first 40% drop. The next 40% in quality of that street drops over 12% of the time. And so it really falls off after, and you can see after just prior to 20 years, the street quality, the street functionality really falls off at that time. And then those little pull-outs, I don't know if you can see them or not, but basically for each dollar spent on renovation is what we're calling that. So it would be the seal coat, the overlays, and that type of renovation spent prior to that second 40% drop. If you wait to the second 40% drop, you're going to spend 4 to 8 times more money on that same street that you would have had you caught it ahead of time in the fair to good portion on up. So that's what I've been trying to say, that things are, it's kind of a little counterintuitive where you've got to maintain your good streets before you maintain your streets that are beyond repair. This would be one indication. I've got 2 charts that look similar to this. This is one I pulled off of, I can't even remember who I pulled this from, but effectively this is what would happen. So the red line on the left would show a brand new street, our ratings from 0 to 100. As I mentioned before, 100 being a brand new street, 0 being a terrible street, and, the different levels that it goes through on its road to ruin, if you will. And so that red line would show if you did absolutely nothing to that street, and this chart's showing 18 years, and as I've mentioned before, you can get almost 20 years out of a street if you do absolutely nothing to that. However, they've got seal coats at when the rating drops to a 75, and then this particular chart does overlays as it drops to a 50. And so in this particular street section example, you would do 3 seal coats and then an overlay, and then you do 2 seal coats, an overlay, and so on until you get to a reconstruct at, and this is indicating 75 years. Now, that may be a little hard to imagine, which is why we've kind of done it this direction. This is directly from our pavement management program that was put together in 1995. And what this is showing is that we'll do a crack seal in about 3 years' time, 3 to 4 years' time, and then a seal coat at 10, and then an overlay at almost 20. And what that does is it extends it, as you can see, to about 40 years for that reconstruct instead of the 75 as the last chart showed. But this one is directly out of our pavement management program, and that we've been trying to follow this about 7-year cycle to try to maintain these streets and keep them in the good to great category. This is just the actual pages of the pavement management program, and it's been updated with the new engineering department, myself, and then but the same numbers, obviously the same text that was put together when Mr. Odens was here and Holly was here following this. You can see the chart on the right side. I just blew that up to see a little larger. And it tells us basically every street is continually investigated, although it's been a few years now since we've gone out and actually done a new number on each street. It's been a couple years, but each street is continually investigated as the Public Works Department is out on these streets daily. Second, third, or third and fourth, if you will, pages of this particular document shows the different options we have for crack sealing, seal coat, mill and overlay, and reconstruct of these streets, and then some pictures of guys in trenches for anybody that's interested in that. So this is our index that we base our streets on. As I've mentioned before, PCI would be pavement condition index for those that are interested. That would be 100 would be if you wanted to look at it as a percent, you can look at it as a percent, but it's a newly constructed, obviously no maintenance is recommended at that time. Down to 71 is we're calling, in our particular chart, we're calling it adequate. I've heard them called good, I've heard them called whatever else, but that would be where a seal coat would be potentially recommended. Down to 55 would be a marginal in our particular categories, and that's when you get down to that range, to the 50 range, you're looking at a mill and overlay, and then below that range, you're looking at a reconstruct on our particular streets. And as you remember from the tour we did, we tried to look at a range of a lot of these PCI numbers. So. This one's hard to read as well. Once again, you'll get this. We can get this email to you, but I've put together a map that shows these ratings in about the same categories that I just indicated. So in this particular map, the red, the 0 to 44 streets would be our inadequate streets, if you will. I hate to say anything is inadequate. The beyond maintenance streets, let's put it that way, that would be in the reconstruct category. The 45 to 60 would be the orange ones on this particular street, which you could probably get away with a mill and overlay. The 61 to 75 would be the green streets that on this particular map that would you could get away with a seal coat. And if it doesn't have a color at all on this particular map, it's above that range, and so we'd be looking at in the next few years, but not currently. I've got 3 charts here that kind of gives an indication of what the ratings are across town. So this would have been in 2000, so almost 15 years ago. And then the number above each of these bars is the number of miles that we have of that particular category in town, or of that particular PCI range, if you will. So in 2000, we had, for instance, we had 12 miles in the 90 to 100 range. We had 28 miles in the 80 to 90 range, and so forth. We had, in contrast, we had very few miles in the rebuild stage in 2000. In 09, you can see we've dropped in the middle category, which would be the mill and overlay, but unfortunately we've increased on the rebuild stage. Like I said, this was 5 years ago, and we've also increased on the the good, and on up range. And so what that shows is that we're maintaining the streets we have from overlay on up, but unfortunately, we've allowed some of those, by not doing enough overlays or not doing enough maintenance, we've allowed some of those to fall into the need to reconstruct stage. This is current 2014, once again, the miles, and you can see we've kind of similar that we had 5 years ago. So we've got quite a few miles in the 70 on up range, and then it's kind of leveled off from there on down, that it's a combination of overlay and reconstruct. So when we get to the street selection criteria, this is what we go through on every street when we get to the point of what do we do with this street? Do we do this street, I guess would be the first question, and then how much or can we do on this particular section. So we look at the age condition of the water main, so we are in direct contact with municipal utilities and see if they've got, number one, got the money to do that particular section, if it's, what that water line, what that water main is, the quality of that water main is, and see if we need to do that section. The age and condition of the sanitary sewer, if there's any stormwater issues, and some of them, when you get a June like we had this year, some of them get exposed more often than others. The hazard mitigated street maintenance issues. So we go back to that database that I showed you on that third or fourth slide, and shows, okay, what have we done on the history? And every time we do maintenance on those streets, the engineering department puts that information into the database, and then we take that into account when we start selection criteria. The age and condition of the street surfaces, once again, back to that database, and we look at that and see what is the condition of these surfaces. We physically drive these. We do the PCI on those streets, and we take that into account. The location in the city, we try to accommodate as many different wards, if you will, different areas of the city as we can, and so that we're not trying to concentrate on one specific area of town. We try to spread the resources, if you will. Funding sources, and we've talked about them, and Steve's gone to great lengths at gathering that information and the different funding sources for the streets. Volume on those particular streets, which actually comes into play when you start talking about your condition. The traffic volume is directly related to that. And then, of course, project coordination with, are we talking state aid, are we talking county aid, are we talking MUC? What other funding sources are available for that? I put together a quick, and you guys already saw this earlier tonight, quick pavement improvement funding. And of course, like I said, like was indicated earlier, bonding, cash, special revenues, lost funds, things of that nature. So this is just more of a summary of some of the things available to put those for funding in those streets. And I see we got a typo in there, so I'll go on beyond that one quickly. Just more of an information, the last 2 years, street project costs per mile. This is a question that comes up a lot, and I've talked to quite a few of you about this. But in round figures, the top three are overlay projects, and they come into round numbers, 300,000 to just over 300,000 per mile for an overlay project. Whereas a full reconstruction project, you're looking at $2 million a mile. These, of course, are based on small lengths of projects. But I went to a project or a meeting, screening board meeting last week, and they verified that Wilmer is actually at the 1.8, so 1.8 to $2 million a mile for reconstruction of streets. And that's it. I don't know which one you want to hold on. I can answer any questions, and hopefully I didn't go through too fast, and obviously you guys will get this in your packets as well.
Thank you for that, and that was very, very informative. Questions? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean, at the start of the summer, and I would imagine for most of our current street projects where we either did overlay or reconstruction, I think the price of oil was $100 a barrel. In just the last few weeks, it's now $85 a barrel. And what I read is that we could have $80 or less for the next couple of years, considering current supplies and rate of usage around the world. How does that equate in cost per foot? That going to help us? Have we got a chance to catch up here?
Yeah, Councilman Anderson, Councilman Johnson, yeah, I think it will. Obviously, it'll reduce that cost per foot to some degree, provided nothing else goes up in its place. But I think what that could do is we could extend those. We could do some math on it. We could extend those lengths of available miles that we can do for the same amount of money, or additional streets at that time. And yeah, I think, I don't have a year of how many years it'll take to catch up, but it'll definitely help.
I would just think that, that we could see a substantial drop in the price of blacktop, because it's, use a lot of oil for that stuff.
Right.
So might be an opportunity for us to get a few extra miles done.
Councilmember DeBleek?
Yeah, Sean, have you reviewed our street design, if there's anything we can do to modify or change that, the way we design or build our streets to lower the cost?
Yeah, Chairman Anderson, Councilman DeBleek, I have reviewed that, looking through that, and actually quizzed some of the past engineers and regional engineers on it, and actually took a tour of the Minroads section, test section up on I-94, the local road section. And there are some ideas. There are some things we can do. We can tweak what the base looks like, some of the thickness. Not too long ago, we actually increased the depth of the base under the asphalt. So there are some things we can do. I'm continually looking at that, and actually have some time now. The construction will slow down for a little bit here in the winter. We can discuss that and look at some of those things. But I've looked at it. I've got some ideas that we want to try, potentially try on a couple projects next year.
And then sewer lines, a lot of times we open a street up to get at the sewer lines, water lines. Lakeland Drive, we did a liner in the sewer line. Is there more applications we can do those liners rather than digging a street up to replace the pipe?
Yeah, Chairman Anderson, I'd love to do that. I'd love to do, no dig on a lot of them. The problem is each project is specific. And so what happens is the only way you can do that is if the capacity is in the line. So if you got a sewer line that's too small, you can't do that. If you have to replace a 4 or a 6 or, an 8-inch sewer that needs a 12 or 15, 18-inch, you can't do that. But there are a couple other projects, specifically ones that are maybe crossing the railroad or things of that nature that we can look at, and I would like to do that more of the trenchless technology that they're coming out with. It saves money. You can do more length of pipe. You get a great product when you're done, and yeah, I think that's a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And then our question as far as vehicles that are using certain roads and streets, is there any restrictions or where you could put on certain vehicles at certain times of the year that, say, heavier vehicles, looking at buses, garbage trucks that use all residential streets? It seems like they can do a lot of damage at any particular time of the year.
Yeah, Chairman Anderson, Councilmember DeBleek, I'm not 100% familiar with how the road restrictions work, but what I understand is that that certain local roads, then they are restricted, but yet certain state routes, they're not. And so we can look at that. We'd have to look at the base and how that particular section of street was designed and built to see whether we allow that additional weight or not.
Councilmember Rahman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just some quick questions. First of all, I appreciate you being on board because obviously, I have the passion for keeping our streets up, but I'm sure everybody else does too. Based on the information that you have in front of us as far as the condition of our streets, I know you gave us a report earlier showing how many miles needed crack sealing and seal coating and maintenance. I'm just curious how, I think this seems to be a public works and finance issue all in one, how with our current investment policy, our community investment policy, with the amount of earnings we're receiving on that, how we're going to be able to pay for the even the ongoing maintenance. I think we're falling short, and I was just wondering if staff's put anything together on that, or if we have to consider changing our current policy with the taxpayers as property owners versus the city share of reconstructing those areas of the streets, because right now, unless I'm wrong, I'd like to be corrected as to how we're falling behind.
Mr. Chairman, Councilman Ahman, Sean and I have worked on trying to update the pavement management plan, some of that due to financing. Before Ms. Wilson or Holly left, we had a 5-year program, and Sean's, like he said, when construction's done, he's going to have more opportunity. The Community Investment Fund, about 5 years ago, if those council members that were on recall, we increased the utility fee to the $4 as it presently is because the Community Investment Fund's earnings were not keeping up. Also at that time, staff had recommended that when the local option sales tax expired at the end of 2012, that a third funding mechanism was needed to fully fund the program, and nothing has really materialized since then. So the council will need to look at, in order to, if you follow your pavement management plan, arrive at a different funding source to catch up, not only catch up, but to maintain the plan as it would be adopted.
Do you have any numbers associated with that, approximate numbers? How many million during the next 10 years we're going to need to get caught up, or has anybody put any numbers to that type of?
Councilmember Anderson, Councilmember Alman, I'm not sure we've put together numbers for the next 10 years. I don't know what that would look like. We can sure look into that and see what that is. I know that we could take today's street PCI and put $1 of today's construction dollars on it, which, as we mentioned earlier, is not necessarily going to be accurate next year. But yeah, we could do a dollar amount per streets to get everything to 100 and kind of back it off after that. But it's going to be a rather large number.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we did present to the council was that the capital improvement program had been at $2.5 million for many years. So we did, as a committee, discuss this and increase that just to maintain what you're able to do as far as length with the increased cost. Now, Councilman Johnson, points out that oil prices go down, so that would have an impact on that. But again, you would have to calculate that on present dollars if you project out 10 years. 5 years is probably a more realistic target as far as costs go.
Yeah, if you look at the 2015 through 2019 plan, it goes from, the proposal for 2015 is about 2.7 million, and then 2016 it's 3 million, and then 3.2 million. It's going up by about 250,000 a year is what we're proposing in terms of bonded in terms of debt service for streets. I mean, to again try to keep up with the cost of inflation and some of those others. It has been much like the parks were 30,000 a year for many years. The streets have been 2.5 million for many years.
Also, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
In past years, when we were in the council, a lot of you might recall we took the unallocated funds that were spent in the previous year, and we put that in. We started building up the community investment fund, and I know we've done that, I think, in the past. We've taken the unspent funds for the after the calendar year is expired, and we put in those additional funds back into the community investment fund to get that started years ago, back in 1990, I believe is when it was started.
Actually, in 1990, there was a number of informally defeased bond issues. Yeah, because interest rates in the early 80s or late 80s and early 90s, interest rates dropped, and so the assessments were collecting at a higher rate, and so those bonds were informally defeased. That's actually where those dollars come from. Mm-hmm. And the Community Investment Fund actually buys the liability of a debt service fund on agricultural exempt assessments or anything like that. But they also get the obligation for the Community Investment Fund is reduced if the projects actually come in less than what we had intended or bonded for, because those bond proceeds can only be used for the construction or have to go back into the debt service fund that they were sold for. So that would reduce that obligation out of the community investment. So we're constantly working with those numbers. But the Community Investment Fund was established by informally defeased issues back in the late 80s, and it was created in 1990. Yeah.
One other question, Mr. Chairman, and I know this is maybe not dealing directly with the budget, but to attack the problem of how we're going to do this, it's going to take a little more discussion, obviously, and some hard decisions. But one of them is the ag deferments that you referred to, Mr. Oakins, is how we're going to continue with that policy and how we're going to have to maybe change the the city share of the, and the property owner's share of the portion of reconstruction maintenance of the streets. I just don't see this going away, and of course, I don't want to burden you with my passion for seeing reality, but the complaints from people in town, the taxpayers I talk to, out of all the complaints you'd think they complain about, the number one is the streets. It's not about our parks. It's not about anything else. Number one complaint I receive from people is about the condition of our streets. So it's like if they're trying to send us a message, or at least me a message, I don't know what you've received, that's telling us we got some work to do, because that's what they're paying their money for. Thank you.
Okay. And that's a priority issue we need to talk about. I have a question that relates a little bit to what Councilmember DeBleek was saying, but complete streets are not something that we talk about very often, you know, and that's, be it narrower or be it bike lanes in the streets or things like that. Are we in tune at all with the concept of complete streets?
Councilmember Anderson, I have looked into that and hear the term a lot, as you're aware, and have been doing some research on it on the side in all my spare time that I've got. You know, I try to do that, some of that stuff. But yes, we've looked at different ways of either different bike paths, whether it be shared pathway, whether it be a dedicated pathway, what's separated from the road, in the road, things of that nature. Narrower, wider, traffic calming. We've got all kinds of terms that we've been looking into. And as streets come up for a full reconstruction, which, as you can see, the miles-wise, there's not that many, but as they come up for full reconstruction, we'd consider all those aspects.
All right. Councilmember Nelson?
Two questions, but on the complete streets, I know there's some designations you can get if you do incorporate complete streets into biking those. Do they lend themselves to any money that comes along with adopting that?
Yeah, Chairman Anderson, Councilmember Nelson, they do, anytime you deal with different aspects of those complete streets, the bike lanes, lend themselves to grant money for that portion of the project. You know, there's potentially grants out there for water and sewer that lend themselves for that portion of the project, and same with storm drain. So,
Okay.
anytime you can add more to that project, you got potential funding available.
Okay.
Yes.
Second question that I had, even if we wanted to speed up the reconstruction, I know it's been said the utilities can only do so many. Is there a threshold that they have on, or how does that work when we work with them as the number of miles that can be done?
Councilmember Anderson, Councilmember Nelson, I'm sure there is. I don't know what that number is as far as if it's different every year, if it's the same every year. But obviously, everybody's got a limited budget, and they can only do so many. But the last thing we want to do, as you're well aware, last thing we want to do is go in and do a street because a street is needed, and then 1, 2, 3, even 5 years down the road, have them completely dug up again for a water line.
Sean, can you also maybe address kind of what the assessment policy or what the average assessment is right now for streets? I mean, the percentage that we're assessing right now on average?
Yeah, Chairman Anderson, I just wrote that note down that I didn't have it in my slide, so for future use, it'll be in the slides. But on the overlay, if I remember right, we're at the 30% range. Does that sound right? 25 to 30% range. And then, of course, on a reconstruct, I believe it's 75. I'm looking at Steve, but
it doesn't quite reach the 75 because of different variables that if you have an avenue and there's not a street address side, those reduce that percentage normally down to somewhere in the 55 to 60, I think, even range.
And beyond that, what we do is we come up with that number in our head when we start the math on it, and then if that number is significantly different than previous years, we try to make it roughly, similar with some inflation in there for the previous years.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm starting to watch the clock here. So, okay, go ahead.
I'm aware of that, but I guess with what we did last year, I just wondered if we're going to accept that we have this pavement management program in place. Is that the instructions for our staff going forward? With that we are going to follow that.
Are you talking the 9th and 10th Street?
The fact that we didn't, that we pulled some things and pulled
14?
with that.
If you're asking, I think we should follow the policy. or else review the policy. As Sean indicated, sometimes it's counterintuitive that why do I want to repair a street that is seemingly in good shape? Well, you repair it so that it doesn't get to be a problem. But that's just my thoughts, is that I think we should follow our policy.
I guess I just have a concern that we're already behind, that if we reach that point in time, if we haven't made a commitment to doing that, that we get further behind, so.
Okay. I think we all know that there's some degree of pavement management issues that are out there that we're going to have to wrestle with. And we want to talk about some possible revenue sources, see what staff has to say, and then I have something as an idea.
I think Mr. Okins can cover a couple of them that were suggested, and one that was suggested, and I guess we really would like some direction on whether the council wishes to pursue that, is the franchise fee on the gas utility.
Yes, we have had natural gas company get back to us with a revised number as far as connections. It has increased by about 140 connections. They have indicated that they are more than willing to come out and meet with the committee or the city to discuss a franchise fee. I did not schedule that at this point, waiting for direction from the council to see if that is indeed what you want to do.
And the estimated revenue, again, from that would?
It was in the $250,000 range, so it would go up slightly, not even, probably about, let me see, about 2%.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to have to wrestle with that at a meeting soon, if we want to do that.
Mr. Chairman, the other item that I have here that you discussed at a previous meeting was of the fire charges for fire calls.
And I think there's still some work we have to do to verify those numbers, so we'll come back with some.
Okay, all right. And that had to do with charging the fee, not only just accepting when the insurance company wants to pay it, but also setting a fee and expecting to receive it. So, okay.
But again, I think if there's not, I mean, I think we can, we'll do the work to update and verify the numbers, but similar to the gas utility, if there's just no interest in pursuing them, we'd like to know that, I guess, now before we spend much more time and work on those. But if there's still some interest, at least in further discussion from the finance committee.
Can I get a shake of the head, yeah, there's an interest? Or no, there's not an interest? I'm getting raised eyebrows. Okay, I think I'm seeing, yeah, let's continue to look at it.
Okay.
All right. That's what you have?
Yes, those were the two sources that we.
All right, I have an idea, and I haven't run it past staff other than to get a couple of numbers. I don't know if it's good public policy or not, but a couple prongs to it. One, the mayor has put in the budget $147,000 as for street improvements. Well, I'm thinking, why don't we use that as principal and interest payment? In other words, bond for whatever $147,000 will get you for 10 years. And according to the loan amortization thing table that I have on my computer at home, $147,000 would get us about a $1.2 million loan. So in other words, in 2015, we would allocate the $147,000 and put it right into bond payments, and it'll give us an additional $1.2 million of street improvements. Now, that ties that money up for 10 years. So, but it gives us a shot in the arm right away. And then I thought maybe in a year or two, we should look at increasing the utility fee, and I went with $1.50 a month. That would give us, again, about $150,000, which again would give us another shot of $1.2 million, but tying that money up for 10 years. So, I don't know. Is it good public policy or is it not good public policy? It gets us a shot, it gets us, and I also, incidentally, I wouldn't reduce the amount of money that we have in our capital improvement programs for any of the out years, I'd leave that in there. This just gets us more money right away to take a big shot at this. So, I don't know. Good idea, bad idea? Councilmember DeBleek?
Yes,
I'd
my-
like staff to weigh in too.
My only question on that there is with the general obligation bonds, would they require any kind of voter approval? Or are they, if you're talking, bonds?
I don't think it would be general obligation. It would just be street bonds, revenue bond.
Well, they would be GO, special assessment revenue bonds, where you would be required to assess at least 20%. They would be like the normal street bonds that we've been using. Now, we have, in 2014, had conversations with the local institutions, if the council remembers, and so those discussions continue, and the local lending institutions have expressed willingness to continue those discussions, so. But they would be normally like we have been using the GO special revenue bonds.
And I think we just have to look at what the 147,000 is being used for annually and what that does. When you would be taking it out of the other, crack sealing or other types of maintenance and putting it to, for 10 years towards a 1.2 million, but it certainly can be done. And I think we could look at the increase in the utility fee. I think we have to show that that is justified and not, essentially we'd have to show that it's not keeping up or keeping pace before to be able to raise that. But in talking, I think, we'll have to go back and look at the statute. It was set by ordinance, so it has to be changed by ordinance. But I think it is possible to change that.
I have a question.
Yes.
How would you pay back the 1.2 million?
With the $147,000 that you put in for road improvements, you pay that for 10 years. You use that money for 10 years, and that pays back that bond.
Pays back the bond.
We get the money right away, and we pay for it over 10 years. It's just taking a loan. I mean, that's all it is. Councilmember Rahman?
Just another, maybe it's mundane, maybe it's not, but one thing I haven't seen in Sean's presentation, and maybe Sean can address it, is the maintenance that we have to perform on the county ditches. I understand we transferred ownership of County Ditch 23A, which runs through Pheasant Run and Gulf Valley Golf Course area back to the city. And I also understand there's a fee that the people adjoining those ditches have been paying to the county for several years for maintenance and operations of that system. I'm just curious, now that we have taken over the ownership, it was recommended we taken over the maintenance of that, how that's affected or how it's shown in the current budget.
Chairman Anderson, Councilmember Alman, I'm not exactly sure how it shows up in the budget, on which side it shows up on, but you're exactly right. We do the maintenance of those ditches, basically most of the ditches within the city limits. That being the most recent one that we've taken over ownership of. And then my understanding is, as a county resident, you don't pay the county taxes on that ditch, for that particular ditch anymore. I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but that's my understanding.
All right, so we have funds allocated for cleaning those ditches to improve water flow?
Yeah, Chairman Anderson, that's exactly right. And, at some point, we will probably have to have a conversation that increases the stormwater budget, if you will, that would include those ditches, but there is money in the current budget to maintain those ditches.
Those costs are charged to the Public Works Department under maintenance.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you. Just another brief comment. I don't know how we're going to be able to establish a change in policy. It seems there's a whole bunch of issues, Mayor and Council, that we have to address dealing with this shortfall of funds without increasing taxes. And it looks like there's going to have to be a combination of both. And I don't know, we're going to be trying to making some decisions here, and the recommendations, Mr. Fagerly brought up the fire calls and the gas franchise fee. Those are options. But I think we're missing out here if we decide to do this. I don't know what's the direction of the chairmanship's position is here today, to make recommendations or to just have discussion on it. But if we are going to have this, I think we better get our citizens involved. And I think it's going to be more than just the 8 or 9 people making this decision. We're going to have some input and some numbers put to this project as how we're going to pay for it. And we have to explain it to the citizens that if we are going to increase these fees, this is how it's going to work, and this is how we're going to take care of our streets. I don't think it's just as simple as saying it's a good idea and we should accept it and start it. I think we need to have a plan to sell to the community, and I don't know how that's going to be addressed, but I would feel much more comfortable as a council person to be able to explain it or somehow be reasonably be able to explain it to the people how we're going to be increasing these fees if we have to, and how it's going to pay back into our street reconstruction project. And I think this is
I mean, you're talking, I want to make sure I understand, you're talking about if we increase the taxes to do this?
Well, both, not only the taxes, but these other options that you're discussing here. So I'm just not sure what our direction is, or we're talking about it. Are we trying to set a policy here today as a?
We're not trying to set it today, but I think it has to be soon. I mean, we're talking the 2015 budget.
Right.
So, we don't have a lot of time. I think the educational piece could easily be done. I don't have a problem with that. But, I mean, we're starting to get to crunch time with what we want to do.
Well,
and I think we're all trying to figure out ways to, to get the money into the streets. So but we need to get that decided, and we need to get this discussion ended, because we have to be out here at 6:30.
I know, yeah. Well,
We have a finance committee. Go ahead.
I'm not going to I've let my opinions be known how we should take care of some of the shortfall in street construction projects, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay,
Thank
all right.
you.
Councilmember Nelson?
I think we should pursue, your ideas, just have staff check out to see whether they're feasible or not and how they fit in with the others. And if we're looking at, it's a.
That was
If you're
kind of
trying
my
to catch
thought.
up, I
Unless
think we gotta
somebody
look at all of
says
them.
it's really dumb, that it's bad public policy, then I wouldn't do that.
We'll let the staff come back with that and tell us if it is or not.
We'll come back with some additional information on the pros and cons of them. and
Yeah, because
bring it
I've
back to
just,
the Finance
I
Committee.
mean, this is the first they're hearing about it as well. Okay. Well, this is a really good discussion, yes. Councilmember Bleak.
Go along with Councilmember Almond's comments, I think we should also look at our assessment policy, review that policy, and see if it is still valid for the way we are assessing properties.
Okay. All right. Any final thoughts on pavement management? Okay, well, then we're going to switch gears, and we're going to go to the Finance Committee. We've got a couple of items on our agenda to talk about in the Finance Committee. And the first one is agricultural land leases.
You have before you a summary of the agricultural land leases. There's a grand total of 13 lease tracts for 4 years for a little over $500,000, $562,947. It's the staff recommendation that we accept the high bids on those properties. And of course, just a reminder that pursuant to prior action, Mr. Dan Groothouse would be able to lease right-of-way 2, and that would be drafted at the 226.21 per acre, and that's based upon the action the council took, and it's our recommendation that you award those leases.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the leases as in our outline here. Questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Police Department.
Chief Fell to give a brief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. An item for your consideration tonight is requesting authorization to establish a city account for the Wilmer Police Department Explorer Program. What the Police Department Explorer Program we're putting together is it's part of Boy Scouts of America, the Learning for Life program, where you teach young people age 14 to 21 about law enforcement careers, expose them to the police department. It's a good enrichment tool for law enforcement in the community also. I've talked with other police departments along with city finance about the best way to run the finances of that program. Financing of that is done through the students or the young people raise money themselves, and it would be for things like purchasing uniforms, basic equipment, other supplies for the program. And they recommend setting up a separate account through city finances. It would be under the direction of the finance department. Purchases would be authorized by the chief of police. And the Heritage Bank requires committee action in order to set up a separate account for that.
I'll make a motion to authorize the establishing the internal city account for the Wilmer Police Department Explorer Program.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Is there any old business? Is there any new business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just remind the committee that the next work session will be November 10th, and that one is when the community groups, Rice Hospital, Wilmer Municipal Utilities will...
Yep. And we'll be under the same time constraints then, because that's the second Monday, and whatever it is that meets here on the second
The
Monday.
townships.
The township will also be meeting, so we'll need to be done by 6:30,
So
but
we would recommend maybe starting at 4 o'clock.
I think
again.
we'll start at 4. I think it was a really productive session. Thanks to everybody. A job well done. We're adjourned.